Back to order. Friday, February 3rd, 2022, the committee will commence its study of Bill C-35, an act respecting early learning and childhood care in Canada. I would like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussion. Before we do the witness list, again, I simply want to remind members that we are appearing in a virtual manner. Some are appearing virtually, and today, actually, everybody is in the room. I would ask those, before you speak, wait till I recognize you. Direct all your questions and answers through the chair, and you have the option of choosing to speak in the official language of your choice. If there is an issue with interpretation, please get my attention, and I will suspend while it is clarified. So we're beginning with Michelle Latmore, Director General, Federal Secretariat on Early Learning and Child Care; Sherry Redden, Director General, Indigenous Early Learning and Child Care Secretariat; Elizabeth Kazgua, Director, Federal Secretariat on Early Learning and Child Care; Jill Henry, Director, Policy, Indigenous Early Learning and Child Care; Kelly Nares, Director, Federal Secretary on Early Learning and Child Care; and Christian Parady, Director, Federal Secretariat on Early Learning and Child Care. I welcome the department to begin their presentation, following which we'll open the floor to questions, and you have up to 30 minutes to give your overview to committee members, beginning with who is beginning? Ms. Latmore, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon avec vous aujourd'hui pour vous
to be here with you today to provide you with technical information about the Canada-wide early learning and child care system and Bill C-35 that, as you know, has been tabled in Parliament on the 8th of December 2022.
We'll provide details on the vision, objectives, and other key elements of Bill C-35. But prior to outlining the specifics of the proposed legislation, I understand there is some interest in digging into the agreements a little bit, so we'd like to take some time to situate the bill within the broader context of the Canada-wide system that is being built in collaboration with provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners. After the presentation, we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Slide 3 in our deck provides an overview of recent federal commitments with respect to early learning and childcare. Since 2016, the Government of Canada, in collaboration with provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners, has provided significant investments, which I won't repeat, but they're detailed on the slide, and has undertaken a range of activities to advance a Canada-wide system. What is perhaps most important that you understand is that this work is grounded in two frameworks: the Multilateral Early Learning and Childcare Framework and the Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Framework. The multilateral framework was endorsed in June 2017 by all federal, provincial, and territorial ministers, with the exception of Quebec. This framework sets the foundation for a shared long-term vision for early learning and childcare, guided by the agreed-upon principles of quality, accessibility, affordability, flexibility, and inclusivity. It is these shared principles that formed the foundation of the initial bilateral agreements with provinces and territories in 2017, as well as extensions to those agreements and the new Canada-wide agreements signed just last year. J'aimerais reconnaître que
I would like to recognize that even though Quebec has stated that it supports the overall principles of the framework, it does not formally hasn't formally joined the framework itself. The governments of Quebec and Canada recognize Quebec's leadership in matters of early learning and childcare, and together we are negotiating and have negotiated asymmetric agreements for the transfer of federal funding for the Quebec system. Within this agreement, Quebec is not bearing the same commitments and same requirements that other provinces are, and I will get back to that later.
In 2017, the Government of Canada and Indigenous partners undertook a comprehensive engagement process to support Indigenous early learning and childcare. Informed by this engagement, the government worked with Indigenous partners to co-develop the Indigenous early learning and childcare framework, which was endorsed by the Government of Canada, Assembly of First Nations, Inuit, Tepirit, Kanatami, and Métis National Council, and publicly released in September 2018. This framework lays out a shared vision, principles, and a path forward for high-quality, culturally strong Indigenous early learning and childcare for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis families. As I mentioned at the outset, I would like to take a little time on slide 4 to position the legislation within the broader context of the Canada-wide system, core to which are the bilateral agreements with provinces, territories, and Indigenous partners. These are the 5-year Canada-wide agreements running from fiscal year 2021-22 to 2025-26, which govern the transfer to provinces and territories of the $27.2 billion investment announced in Budget 2021. We also have what we often refer to as the extension agreements, a separate set of bilateral agreements with provinces and territories that outline the transfer of Budget 2016 and 2017 investments. And finally, we have funding agreements with Indigenous partners for Indigenous early learning and childcare, which are guided by the co-developed Indigenous early learning and childcare framework and managed through national and regional partnership tables. Mais le système est tellement...
However, the system is much broader than simply a set of agreements, and that's what we're going to try to show you here. We're going to try to show you the numbers of initiatives that support the Canada-wide system as it develops.
Number of multilateral entities looking at current challenges and emerging issues regarding early learning and childcare, including, importantly, challenges related to the early childhood educator workforce. These include, first, the national and regional Indigenous early learning and childcare partnership tables, which support early learning and childcare implementation to enable First Nations, Inuit, and Métis-led decision-making, and a pathway to transfer high-quality Indigenous early learning and childcare programs to regional Indigenous governing bodies. Second, the federal, provincial, and territorial forum of ministers most responsible for early learning and childcare, which was established in July of 2022 as a mechanism to discuss emerging issues and advanced shared ELCC priorities. And third, the National Advisory Council on Early Learning and Childcare, which was announced in November 2022 to provide advice and a forum for engagement on issues facing the early learning and childcare sector. Supporting this work is us, the Federal Secretariats on Early Learning and Childcare and Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare. The Federal Secretariat, which I lead, was first announced in the government's 2020 Fall Economic Statement and launched in August 2021. Among other things, we negotiate and manage the bilateral agreements with provinces and territories, provide oversight for investments in data and research projects, manage the Early Learning and Childcare Innovation Program, and provide Secretariat support to the National Advisory Council and the FPT Ministers Table. My colleague, Ms. Redden, leads the Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Secretariat, which was established at ESDC in response to feedback from national engagement and commitments in the IELCC framework around improving federal coordination and streamlined administration. Ms. Redden and her team act as the federal focal point for Indigenous ELCC transformation, support Indigenous elements of broader Government of Canada ELCC strategies, and liaise with key federal departments on the implementation of the Indigenous ELCC Transformative Initiative to ensure better horizontal coordination among departments in support of comprehensive and holistic Indigenous ELCC approaches. Lastly, of course, Bill C-35, the Canada Early Learning and Childcare Act, which is intended to complement and reinforce other elements of the Canada-wide system by, among other things, establishing in law federal commitments to provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners to continue to work with them to build and maintain a Canada-wide system. C'est beaucoup, mais au sein...
That's a lot. But on slide 5, you will see the agreements with provinces and territories that are essential to the ongoing development and success of the system across Canada.
Budget 2021 earmarked $27.2 billion for provincial and territorial transfers to form the cornerstone of the system, complementing bilateral agreements in ELCC that were signed with provinces and territories to implement earlier federal funding from budgets 2016 and 2017. Budget 2021 also committed the federal government to work with provincial and territorial governments to support primarily not-for-profit providers to expand the number of regulated spaces. Agreements were signed with all 13 provinces and territories between July 2021 and March 2022, with Quebec signing an asymmetrical agreement in recognition of their existing ELCC system. The Canada-wide agreements are long, they are detailed, they are all available online, but most importantly, they are binding legal documents that lay out provincial and territorial commitments to meet objectives related to 4 agreed-upon principles: affordability, access, high quality, and inclusivity. They lay out eligible areas of investment and financial provisions and reporting requirements. Maintenant, à la diapositive 6, certaines des
And now, at slide 6, we underscore some of the specific commitments that are to be found in the agreements.
To reduce average fees for regulated childcare by 50% by the end of 2022 and achieve an average cost of $10 a day for regulated childcare for children under 6 by 2025-2026. You'll see on the table on the following slide exactly where provinces and territories are at on that. Under access, agreements commit each jurisdiction to creating a specific number of new childcare spaces by 2025-26, over 250,000 of them, the vast majority not-for-profit spaces. The Canada-wide agreements also commit the provinces and territories to specific activities related to the delivery of high-quality childcare. For all provinces and territories, this includes commitments to support the recruitment and retention of a skilled, qualified, early childhood educator workforce. In terms of the principle of inclusion, PTs have committed to developing and implementing plans to ensure that vulnerable children and children from diverse populations have equitable access to regulated childcare spaces. La septième diapositive.
The 7th page gives you an idea of the current situation when it comes to affordability and accessibility. I won't spend too much time on this slide, given that it's quite explicit and detailed.
Just to outline some of the progress that provinces and territories have been making with respect to shared objectives and commitments on affordability and access. You'll see all but one jurisdiction approved the commitment to reduce childcare fees by 50% by the end of 2022. But at the end of the day, that was reflective of the fact that Manitoba was able to jump to a $10 a day commitment as of April 2nd of this year, just announced on Friday. Everyone else, you will see, is either on track or there already, noting that affordability commitments are not applicable to the Quebec Agreement, as the province already had a highly affordable system in place at the time of signature. Finally, as I mentioned previously, in the Canada-wide agreements, provinces and territories have committed to creating over 250,000 new spaces by March 2026. The last column of the table summarizes space creation in each province and territory. The next slide of the presentation, slide 8, provides some recent examples of provincial and territorial announcements related to the provision of high-quality early learning and childcare programs and services, which, as many of you know, is closely tied to the ECE workforce. While the Government of Canada cannot set standards that amount to regulating childcare, including the ECE workforce, as jurisdiction of this falls under the purview of provinces and territories, what the federal government can do is attach some limited conditions to money transferred to provinces, which we do through the Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreements and their associated action plans. For example, through the Canada-wide agreements, jurisdictions are required to demonstrate meaningful progress on improving the quality of ELCC programs and services through workforce-related commitments, And so we are seeing provinces and territories announcing ECE workforce strategies and measures to recruit and retain ECEs in the sector in areas such as hiring, retention, training, and wage increases. Funding has also been used to recruit, train, and retain Indigenous early childhood educators, including the establishment of baseline wage scales to remain competitive with ELCC sites operating in a provincial and territorial context. En plus d'établir des principes et
And over and beyond drawing up principles and objectives, each area is covered by specific investment.
in each bilateral agreement, recognizing that each jurisdiction has the responsibility to develop or enhance a system that best responds to the needs and priorities of their communities. But I can say in general that the agreements lay out the following. First, that federal funding is invested to expand regulated or licensed childcare for children under 6 years old. Second, that not-for-profit or publicly delivered childcare is prioritized, while recognizing that in some jurisdictions, not-for-profit, public, and private and for-profit operators all play a role in the delivery of high-quality, regulated childcare. Third, that provinces and territories take into account the needs of official language minority communities in developing and delivering programs and services. Fourth, that they deliver innovative approaches to support the principles of the Canada-wide system. And finally, that they make efforts to target funding toward vulnerable families, including families of children with disabilities, lower-income families, and families in underserved communities. The agreements include PT action plans that provide more details on specific investments that PTs will undertake in support of eligible areas in order to achieve the Canada-wide early learning and childcare objectives. Currently, provinces and territories have prepared action plans for the fiscal years 2021-2022 and 2022-2023. They will be submitting their action plans for the remaining years of the Canada-wide agreements at the beginning of the next fiscal year, with two exceptions. Ontario plan is a little bit different because they signed so late, so we already have their plan for next year, and Quebec is not required to submit an action plan under their asymmetrical agreement. Les ententes comprennent également des
The agreements also lay out financial and reporting provisions in great detail. They're summarized on slide 10. These financial provisions involve details about the federal amounts. For example, the Canada amount is paid out per semester in equal amounts.
around this. Beginning in the second year of the agreement, which is this year, the Canada-wide second payment is withheld if a province or territory does not submit an annual progress report outlining data and results achieved, as well as an audited financial statement of the previous fiscal year. In addition, beginning in 2023-2024, the first annual payment can be withheld if a jurisdiction has not submitted its detailed action plan covering the remainder of the agreement. Funding may also be withheld if a jurisdiction is unable to meet the agreed-upon objectives as set out in the agreement.
Finally, the agreements also include details about the administration of the agreements. We've already touched on reporting, but we've also included a couple of other key measures which are in the agreements.
Bilateral implementation committees as a means to monitor progress on implementation of the agreements and provide a forum to identify challenges in consultation with stakeholders and partners. And lastly, clear processes for any disputes related to agreement noncompliance. Ultimately, this concludes with a 6-month termination clause, which is available to both parties if terms of the agreement are not respected. I'll turn to my colleague, Ms. Redden, to look at the next slides.
12. The Canada-wide approach includes an Indigenous-specific strategy that complements the Canada-wide agreements in place. The goal is not to create separate systems, but rather to enable Indigenous-led strategies within comprehensive and coordinated systems that meets the needs of Indigenous children and families wherever they live. As mentioned, in 2017, a comprehensive national engagement was held on Indigenous early learning and childcare. This informed the co-development of the Indigenous early learning and childcare framework. The framework includes an Indigenous-specific vision and principles and guides our work in this sector. It includes distinct First Nation, Inuit, and Métis early learning and childcare frameworks. Since the mid-1990s, the federal government has been investing in Aboriginal Head Start and daycare programs, and this will continue. D'autres investissements supplémentaires.
Other investments for the early learning and childcare of Indigenous children as of 2018 and strengthened by the 2021 budget are based on the prior programming and will move the priorities of Indigenous peoples into the forefront with a pan-Canadian system for them. Most of these investments are held in funding envelopes that are distinctions-based, and funding is administered through modified contribution agreements. These funds are co-managed by the national and regional tables. This is a process which puts Indigenous decision makers in the forefront of financial decisions about priorities, and work plans.
Which agreement they would like to receive ELCC funding through as 4 federal partners: Employment and Social Development Canada, Indigenous Services Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, and Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada are lined up to support and minister agreements under a common set of program authorities. These investments fall into 3 broad categories. The first are dedicated investments in governance and partnership building. This to enable greater self-determination and Indigenous government participation alongside Canada and provinces and territories in the design and implementation of a Canada-wide system by hiring staff at the political and technical levels and establishing centers of expertise akin to ministries in a federal, provincial, territorial context. The second are increased investments to support Indigenous early learning and childcare programs and services. This funding is flexible and supports a number of priorities identified by Indigenous leaders, including, for example, the development of culturally appropriate curriculum and learning tools, linguistic revitalization initiatives for early learners, and expanded access or hours of care. And finally, dedicated investments in Indigenous early learning and childcare infrastructure, including for minor capital repairs and renovations at existing federal Indigenous early learning and childcare sites, and starting next fiscal year, new investments to replace sites that have outlived their useful life and or build new centers in communities that are underserved. Indigenous early learning and childcare investments alone are not enough to achieve the vision of the Canada-wide system. Collaboration between federal, provincial, territorial, and Indigenous governments is required to help break down barriers in access to early learning and childcare programs and services, and to promote culturally appropriate early learning and childcare models. To anchor this collaboration with Indigenous partners and federal and provincial governments, the Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreements recognize reconciliation, the Indigenous early learning and childcare framework, and the importance of working collaboratively with Indigenous governing bodies and organizations. The Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Transformation Initiative supports federal implementation of the framework. It shifts from a previous program delivery model with Aboriginal Head Start and daycare service providers to a program delivery model with Indigenous governments. We heard from engagement. We know best. We want to be at the forefront of making decisions about children and families in our communities. This approach aligns to that feedback. Cette approche s'aligne également.
This approach also aligns on broader commitments that establish a government-to-government relationship with Indigenous peoples. Finally, this approach aligns with the Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action number 12, which calls on the federal government, provincial and territorial governments as well, to work with Indigenous governments and representatives to create early learning that is adapted to Indigenous needs and culture.
60 national and regional partnership tables or bilateral relationships on Indigenous early learning and childcare across the country. Some of these tables are long-standing and have entrenched governance processes. Others are new, emerging, and focused around key experts or identified technical conveners. Technical capacity is emerging to support and provide advice to Indigenous leaders for their decisions. These partnership tables develop plans, funding allocations, and set priorities. They coordinate Indigenous early learning and childcare activities and enable the sharing of best practices by bringing together many Indigenous partners across programs, sectors, communities, and governments, both nationally and regionally. They're also beginning to serve as venues for provincial territorial dialogue and influence where there's willingness, especially in the context of advancing a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. What is key is that Indigenous leaders are at the forefront of decision-making on funding allocations, plans, and priorities. Canada is at the table to provide oversight and expertise, but the primary federal objective is to ensure that the federal system is lined up to support Indigenous priorities and decisions. Slide 14 provides some examples of early progress in advancing and strengthening Indigenous early learning and childcare. In Manitoba, for example, a First Nation designed and owned strategy and governance model is guiding multi-year investments in Indigenous early learning and childcare, building on a province-wide First Nations education model. In addition, federal investments have supported a total of 73 Inuit communities to expand and improve access to culturally appropriate early learning and childcare programs and services. In Nunavut, federal funding is supporting Indigenous language resources, Inuit cultural programs, and subsidies for the early childhood educator workforce and improvements to childcare facilities. Lastly, I'll highlight that the Métis Nation governments have been working to improve access, affordability, and the availability of culturally appropriate and Métis-specific early learning and childcare programs and services. This includes childcare subsidies in Alberta, Michif and Dene immersion programs for kindergarten students in Saskatchewan, and the establishment of new Métis childcare sites in Manitoba, the Northwest Territories, and British Columbia. Thank you. Now I'll turn back to you, Michelle, to present the vision and approach behind Bill C-35.
Thanks, Sherry. I might say then what is most important, and that is what I think you'll find on slide 15. What I hope you all see at this point is that negotiated agreements are and will remain at the core of how the federal government will work with provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners to implement a Canada-wide system of early learning and childcare. They are short-term by intention, enabling signatories the flexibility to reflect and to course correct as the Canada-wide system evolves. Their associated action plans build in the possibility to articulate even shorter-term investment plans and expected results. The proposed legislation, on the other hand, looks beyond the short term and toward future generations of families and children. Complementing the agreements, the legislation affirms a sustained and ongoing federal commitment to building a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system alongside provinces, territories, and Indigenous partners. In doing so, the proposed legislation would establish in law the federal goals and commitments with respect to a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. The bill was drafted to fully respect provincial and territorial jurisdiction and Indigenous rights, including the right to self-determination. This includes not imposing conditions on provincial and territorial governments and Indigenous peoples. Rather, this bill has been developed to complement and support, not replace or supersede, the Canada-wide agreements with provinces and territories and funding agreements with Indigenous partners. Overall, the legislation represents a significant step forward to demonstrating the federal government's long-term commitment to early learning and childcare and continued collaboration with provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples. Overall, as I hope I've communicated, this is an exercise in collaboration, and it is truly in that spirit that we welcome the committee's study, and we'd be pleased to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Latimore. We'll now open the floor to questions, beginning with Madame Ferrari for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone for being here. It's quite a group, so childcare is pretty important. this country and to our Canadian families. So thank you for all your work on this. If we could, is there any way we could get tabled to the committee? I know on page 7, you've clearly laid out the affordability, but could we have the current wait lists for each province and territory? Is that able to be tabled to the committee?
So wait lists are something that it's very difficult for us to track in detail at the federal level. The administration of childcare is provincial and territorial responsibility. We understand that there is not enough supply of childcare in this country, and that certainly as affordability investments are made, demand is going to become higher. Provinces and territories track wait lists in different ways. We see them at the municipal level sometimes, very rarely at the provincial or territorial level.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I have so many questions. So how are you able to decide what the current demand is if you don't have that data?
So one of the ways that we estimate demand is by looking at first. One of the things we were able to do was look at the Quebec model to get a sense of what it looks like when every family who would like access to a space has access to a space. And based on the experience that we've been able to gather from Quebec, that looks something like about 59% of the children in the province having access to a space. So we can use space availability that exists at the provincial or territorial level to estimate what might be left over at the end.
Would it be beneficial to write into the bill then to ensure that you're able to collect this data to assess and monitor access, as that's sort of one of the key principles in the bill is access, but if you can't access it, if the wait lists are too long?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's really a good example of what we're using the bilateral agreements to do. So we do have language in the bilateral agreements that speaks to the importance of data and reporting, both at the provincial, territorial, and federal level, to help us understand and track progress over time. One of the things that we certainly face around this table and provinces and territories face is that our provincial and territorial colleagues are all at different levels. So we have some provinces who are doing really great work in data collection, others that have a long way to go. And so we in the Secretariat are here to support them in that work and to detail through the bilateral agreements how to get that done.
Thank you. On page 9, or slide 9, however you want to call that, it says to target funding towards families in need. However, the specific wording of Bill C-35 says enable families of varying income to benefit. So how do you reconcile this?
So I think that the language that we're using when we refer to the varying needs of families is intended in the language of the legislation to be all-encompassing of the varying needs of children and families in this country. So it's meant to be encompassing language within the legislation.
Okay. It is interpreted, however, though, that it's not putting those that are most vulnerable in terms of needing the affordability out front. So I just wanted to ask that. On pages 5, 6, and 15, or slide 5, 6, and 15, you have stated it is inclusive, the bill is inclusive no matter where they live. Yet on page 6, or slide 6, it states that it is primarily targeted for not-for-profit, public, family-based childcare. As we know, Canada is a huge geographic country. Many rural parts do not even have center-based childcare. So how are you reconciling that it's inclusive no matter where they live, but you're primarily working for not-for-profit, public, and family-based childcare?
So as I mentioned previously, there is a recognition in the bilateral agreements, certainly, that while the priority is for not-for-profit childcare and the expansion of public childcare in Canada, there is a recognition that provinces and territories all have different approaches, and that the for-profit and private sector does play a role in some provinces and territories. There are mechanisms available through the long-term funding that is promised under the agreements to ensure that all parents who are making use of licensed childcare facilities, whether for-profit or not-for-profit, can have access to service under the Canada-wide system. And mechanisms built into our bilateral agreements to ensure that there's space for profit where that is reasonable.
On page 17, again, I'm just coming back to this, it says inclusivity, but again, it contradicts your slide 6 and access and wait lists. So it just, there seems to be a very big disconnect between wanting to be inclusive, but then stating that you're going primarily for not-for-profit and public. So how are you in being all-inclusive and access for all if it's primarily targeted at one specific group?
The short answer.
I think that the bilateral agreements do provide access to for-profit childcare. We've worked closely, for example, with Alberta to develop a cost control framework that will guide the expansion of for-profit delivery in that province.
Thank you, Madame Ferrari. Mr. Long for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you to our witnesses this after. And thank you for your work on behalf of all Canadians. I ran in 2015 to be a part of a government that delivered transformational programs. And, whether those programs were the Canada Child Benefit or the housing benefit or the workers benefit or what have you, they're transformational. They're there to have a major impact on the lives of Canadians. And I mean, there's absolutely no question that the child care agreements that were signed across the country will do that. And I don't think it's any secret that, in the last election, the party, the Conservative Party, actually ran to scrap that program. And, I heard it many doors from concerned parents that were saying, look, like, you guys are coming forth with a program that is going to cut our child care costs in half and then down to $10. And the other, the Conservative Party is running to scrap it. And I mean, that was in the leaders, it was in the platform, actually. So for Canadians, for those that are watching or listening today, can you just kind of give us at 20,000 feet how important C-35 is? I mean, we all know about the bilateral agreements. We all saw the pictures with the premiers and the minister and things like that. And they were wonderful right across the country. But can you just speak at a very high level to people listening in how important C-35 is and what that means? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. This legislation is about the long term. This legislation entrenches into law the Government of Canada's vision for a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. And that is that all families, regardless of their socioeconomic standing, their racial identity, whether their child has a disability or needs enhanced or individualized support, or where they live in Canada, have access to high-quality, affordable, inclusive early learning and childcare. And in doing so, it includes this commitment to federal funding for the Canada-wide system that goes beyond the current 5-year agreements with provinces and territories, as well as with Indigenous governing bodies. And then it lays out in Section 7 of the principles that will guide those investment decisions. So it sets the guideposts for federal engagement on early learning and childcare from a Canada-wide perspective and ensures that the funding is there long-term to support it. This legislation is about ensuring that a Canada-wide system of early learning and childcare remains in place long into the future, benefiting future generations of families and children long before those who are seeing the benefits today.
So I guess in a word, it entrenches it.
It does entrench it.
I want to just briefly talk about, I know, I think it was MP Frary talked about, rural versus urban. So there's been some members that have said that the initiative, the Canada-wide Early Learning Childcare Agreement, will result in rural Canadians subsidizing those in urban. We've heard that. And there was a member from Kelowna Lake that said that the Government of Canada is opening the door to a two-tiered framework of childcare. Is it true wealthy Canadians will receive better services?
There's nothing in the Canada-wide agreements or in the legislation that is being proposed that creates a two-tier system or that would lead wealthy Canadians to receiving a different level of childcare than any other Canadian. What this legislation does in the context of the Canada-wide system is ensure that families have choice, that families who choose to send children to licensed childcare can feel confident that that childcare is of high quality and will be inclusive of their needs. But recognizing that these investments are there within the context of other investments to support families in Canada. For example, the child care benefit, that families who choose to stay home with their children have access to those supports as well. What the Canada-wide system does is level the playing field across the country and move us in a transformational way toward something that is more consistent from province to province to province.
Thank you. Federal funding is for licensed care. So what's the significance of licensed child care and why does that matter?
Licensed child care matters in provinces and territories, and again, I'll remind the committee that licensing is a matter of provincial and territorial jurisdiction. That is not something that the federal government has purview to be involved in. But licensing, it ensures the quality of care that children are receiving in the country, and so it is the federal government's intention to ensure that we are supporting those spaces that are regulated and that have access to high quality care.
Thank you, Mr. excuse me, Mr. Long. Madame Beyroubet. Bienvenue, Madame.
Welcome, Madam. And I recognize you. You have the floor for the next 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to be here with my colleagues here at the committee, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us. Here's my question. We can agree that C303 that was put forward by the NDP was the ancestor of C35. Not many differences, but there is one difference of concern to me. There is no detailed exemption of Quebec in C35. Do you think it would be so difficult to include a provision to the effect that Quebec fully opts out of this program with full compensation in order to avoid further disagreements between federal and provincial levels of government?
Yes.
Thank you for the question.
This is federally focused legislation that imposes no conditions on the province of Quebec or on any other province or territory in Canada. Quebec remains a signatory onto the our Canada-wide plan through an asymmetrical agreement. What this legislation does is ensure that the federal government will be there for Quebec and for all other provinces in the long term with continued funding to support, in the case of Quebec, continued improvement of its already very successful early learning and childcare system.
pourquoi l'article de
So article or clause, why wasn't clause 4 for Quebec's exemption in 303 used in C35?
Members' bills that were tabled, I will note, predate the Canada-wide system, and a Canada-wide system in particular that relies on bilateral agreements with provinces and territories for the transfer of fund. What we saw in a number of previous private member bills were different approaches to use legislation to create conditionality for provinces and territories. So these were not bills that were solely federally focused, which is what we're looking at today. So in the case of Quebec, legislation that was focused, had a provincial or territorial focus, may have required that kind of exemption clause. But because we have the opportunity to use bilateral agreements, and in particular in the case of Quebec, asymmetrical agreements, to ensure that Quebec, in recognition of the investments that have been made, and the success of their system, are not held, as I explained, to the same reporting requirements as other provinces and territories. There is nothing in particular to exempt Quebec from in the legislation, as it is. There is nothing in the legislation that imposes requirements on Quebec.
Alors, comment l'accord avec
So how is the agreement with Quebec different from those with the other provinces, territories, and Indigenous communities for early learning and childcare?
So the Quebec agreement, the asymmetrical agreement, is different in a few important ways. Quebec is not required to provide the federal government with action plans outlining in detail how they will invest funding. Quebec also, there's a recognition with respect to reporting that Quebec reports within the province to its population and is not required to submit audited financial statements or annual reporting in the same way that other provinces and territories in the country are.
Alors, tout comme on le retrouvait dans C.
So much as in C303, do you think that C35 should recognize the expertise, the unique expertise in North America of the Government of Quebec in matters of childcare, as the international community did in 2003?
I won't presume to speak to whether or not that is something that should exist in the legislation. What I will say is there is recognition certainly in the bilateral agreements with Quebec and in all of our work with Quebec, frankly, even at the FPT ministers' table, recognizing the value that the province has to bring with respect to its long history of work in this field.
La Constitution aussi prévoit que les
The Constitution as well lays out that education and family policy is not a federal competence. Do you think that this legislation respects the competency of Quebec, its jurisdiction?
The legislation respects the jurisdiction of all provinces and territories with respect to early learning and childcare, as well as respecting the role that Indigenous partners and people and governments play in making decisions about Indigenous early learning and childcare and how it applies to their children and families. There is nothing in the proposed legislation that impedes in any way on provincial or territorial jurisdiction.
Second.
10 seconds. You told us earlier something about Indigenous children. You know that in my writing there are several Indigenous communities, and part of C35 is of specific concern to me. We know that the data we have about Indigenous children is outdated. Are we sure that C35 will respond to real current Indigenous needs?
Yeah, so, there's work outside of the legislation to look at Indigenous data in this space. As you can imagine, the collection of data relating to Indigenous children and families is sensitive and requires great care and collaboration. And it's for that reason that we have a public commitment to co-develop First Nation, Inuit, and Métis early learning and childcare results framework to inform our work in this space and to assess progress and gaps going forward.
Mbe-Rubé, Madame Zarillo, for 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to start just by saying thank you for being here and to let you know that families in my riding of Port Moody Coquitlam will be benefiting greatly from this. The second largest expense after their housing is childcare, and this will be life-changing for so many people in the most expensive region of the country. I just wanted to revisit some information about the federal government having limited influence. And I don't think that was the exact words, but the federal government doesn't necessarily have full influence here because it's provincial, territorial, and Indigenous government. But I did want to talk about the workers and immigration opportunities. So StatsCan released data that said that 95% of childcare workers are women, and a third of those workers are immigrants and or non-permanent residents. And there's been a long-standing call from the NDP to regularize workers that are already here in Canada, supporting our economy in a very, very important way. So I'm wondering if the action plans that were spoken of include a workforce strategy and if there are any changes being proposed to immigration law.
Thank you. It's a really great question. So provinces and territories have, at this point, been putting forward workforce strategies that attack challenges with respect to recruitment, to retention, and importantly, to the recognition of the early childhood educator workforce. It is, as you said, a highly gendered and racialized workforce, and so there are a number of challenges that will need to be addressed as we move forward. It is a matter of provincial and territorial jurisdiction. But there is work that the federal government can do to help sort of play in that game. The legislation itself in 7.1d recognizes the role of the workforce in contributing to high quality child care. We use the bilateral agreements to negotiate with provinces and territories greater investments in the workforce itself. And we've seen other more dedicated investments in the workforce as well. So a $420 million investment that was dedicated in budget 2021 specific to the workforce itself. But there is ongoing work that we can do at the federal level to support this more jurisdictionally focused work. And so some of the things that we are thinking about and doing right now is working in collaboration with the federal, provincial, territorial forum of ministers most responsible to talk to provinces and territories about how we can help to help them share best practices and look at regularization. How to look at opportunities, not necessarily focused on immigration, but would allow for more mobility in the workforce. The National Advisory Council on Early Learning and Childcare has workforce as their first priority since being established in November of 2022. And the national and regional Indigenous partnership tables are also seized with how to address workforce challenges in Indigenous early learning and childcare. So whether or not I think at this point, the solutions are in immigration, are in standardized licensing. I think we are on the cusp right now of doing that work with provinces and territories. And what this next round of action plan negotiations gives us, this round that we're getting into right now that cover the last 3 years of the agreements, is an opportunity to really dig in deeper, both bilaterally and multilaterally in this space.
Thank you. And I'll just do a shout out here then from this is important. It's been exploitation, undervalued, underpaid for a really long time. And I'd like to shine a light on this important work and that we need to be regularizing immigration status for people that are doing this important work. I wanted to go to 7.1D because you mentioned it. 7.1D, qualified and well supported. Can you just give us the interpretation of qualified and well supported from your department?
So qualified and well supported to some extent, because again, we're dealing with provincial and territorial jurisdiction, is I think probably interpreted a little bit differently in each province and territory across the country. From our perspective, the Government of Canada is working with provinces and territories to ensure that early childhood educators are well paid, that their profession is respected within communities. But we can't go as far as to set wage grids or wage scales because the early childhood education sector is very much within the provincial and territorial jurisdiction. So by enshrining this principle in legislation, we are underscoring a principle that is already included in the bilateral agreements, and then we'll use the bilateral agreements to work with provinces and territories to add more detail about what that really means within each jurisdiction.
40 seconds still? Oh, I'm going to ask. Ms. Redden, on the Indigenous, it was mentioned twice, Indigenous decision makers in the forefront. And I just wanted to understand we know that free and prior informed consent is a must in this country. So I'm just wondering how free and prior informed consent intersects with this statement made twice today about Indigenous decision makers in the forefront around co-development.
So the proposed legislation will contribute to Canada's implementation of UNDRIP, including the UNDRIP commitment to free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples on laws, policies, or programs that affect their territories. The Department of Justice currently has a co-development process underway with Indigenous governments to give practical application and an action plan to what free, prior, and informed consent will look like for the federal government. And so we're not trying to get out ahead of that process. The legislation is intended to be flexible and to keep up to date as the Crown Indigenous relationship evolves and to catch up to that action plan co-development process.
Thank you, Madame Zarilla. Madame Falk, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Budget 21 made a commitment to introduce early learning childcare legislation. And following consultations with provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners and experts and stakeholders. So when did that consultation take place? And did it inform this legislation as well as the agreements that are now in place with the provinces and territories?
Thank you for the question. So the engagement on legislation itself, we did pre-tabling engagement that took place between January and March of 2022. This was via a discussion guide, so a short document that we put together that was shared with provincial and territorial governments, with approximately 50 Indigenous partners and about 70 early learning and childcare national stakeholders in this space.
Okay, thank you. Can the department provide the committee with the full list of the groups and the individuals that it consulted with?
So we did publish a What We Heard report online in November of 2022, which I believe...
Who you met with the committee, please?
I believe that information is available online, but if not, we can provide that to the committee.
Perfect. And did you say that private childcare was consulted at all? Or was it just not-for-profit?
So we reached out to 70 national and regional stakeholders. Whether or not, I don't want to speak for sure right now, whether or not there were private entities that were involved in that, but we can consult the list.
So why don't you know that? That would seem like, for me, that's as representing a rural riding who does not have access. The major city's 2.5 hours away, either way, east or west from me. That's an important component for parents where I live. So I would make the assumption that the department would know if they consulted with private or not.
Yes. So I've spoken certainly with private providers in the past. What I don't.
Not part of this consultation process?
The consultation process took place between January and March of last year. I would just want to have a look at that list again before confirming absolutely the names on there. I do not remember the names of all 70 that were consulted on that list.
What was identified by each stream as the greatest obstacle in ensuring affordable access to childcare?
In terms of assuring
Public, nonprofit, what was the greatest obstacle that they felt was in the way for affordable access to childcare for parents and children?
So our What We Heard report does not break down what we heard from the perspective of not-for-profit providers or for-profit providers. What our report details is what we heard from provinces and territories, from Indigenous partners, and from experts and stakeholders in the space.
Did the department consult with childcare providers in rural and remote areas?
Childcare providers.
Besides from Indigenous, the Indigenous stream, like stakeholders?
Yeah, childcare providers from rural and remote areas are engaged at our implementation committee tables and are engaged at every step of the way as we look to build the Canada-wide system. We don't distinguish between only engaging with folks at the urban level or the
it matters
rural,
though,
regional level.
because rural and urban are very different. They have different needs. They have different accesses even. That very much matters. And I would hope that the department makes that distinguishment, because there's people in my riding who can't access childcare. And if we're not differentiating, that's a problem. So my follow-up question would be, what was identified as the greatest obstacle in providing affordable access to childcare in rural and remote communities? So how is the department going to address specifically for rural and remote communities the obstacles that parents and children have in accessing childcare?
So I'll just specify that the engagement that I'm speaking about is engagement that was on legislation, and the legislation was not seeking a specific response on access to affordable childcare. We were seeking
won't be addressed.
We were
then.
seeking a response on the legislation, the discussion guide outlining what we expected to see in the legislation, and on the principles that we anticipated would form part of it. So specific responses on challenges that are being faced by rural or remote families in accessing childcare not have been specifically addressed through this
in this
engagement
legislation.
process.
Okay, that's very unfortunate.
Madame Falk, Madame Sachs pour 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you to our officials who are joining us here today to give us a detailed technical briefing on the legislation. And I do appreciate that we spent some time on the agreements prior, because many of the consultations, to what my colleague Ms. Falk was asking about rural access, is part of the provincial consultations that happen with stakeholders that are unique province by province and territory by territory. I'd like to dig into some of the language of the legislation, because there seemed to be a lack of clarity by my colleague, Ms. Ferrari, when it comes to inclusion. In 7C, it says support for the provision of early learning and childcare programs and services that are inclusive and that respect the value of diversity of all children and families responding to their varying needs. So could you just be a little helpful in understanding the language of inclusivity, that we're referring to families and children and not child care providers, because they vary from province to territory?
Yeah, certainly. So inclusivity is addressed in the legislation, as you mentioned, in two different places. So we address it in the declaration portion of the legislation in terms of laying out really the purpose. And that certainly is to ensure that the Canada-wide system is inclusive of of the needs of diverse families across Canada, whether that is, racialized families, families with a disability, families who are in rural, remote communities who may not have access to early learning and childcare. So it's addressed in the declaration section. We also address inclusivity in the principles, as we describe the principles of the legislation. Inclusivity, of course, is in there that aligns with the existing bilateral agreements that have at their core needed investments from provinces and territories in inclusive early learning and childcare.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I'd like to lean into, there's been some comments about flexibility of access in terms of those who are shift workers or those who may have different working hours. We live in an environment today where work varies from family to family, community to community. And could you, there is in 6B of the declaration, it does address flexibility, but could we discuss how the bilateral agreements are really the anchoring of understanding the needs for flexibility of access by provinces and territories in terms of understanding their own communities?
As you've mentioned, so it is in Clause 6B that we speak to in the legislation the importance of flexible early learning and childcare programs and services that are responding to the varying needs of children and families. There are, of course, greater details on all of this in the bilateral agreements. Each province and territory has its own regulations and policies for things like hours of care, length of care during the day, weekend care, pieces like that. But just to give you an example, the Alberta agreement does indicate that an additional grant for those operating flexible and overnight childcare would be provided with such a grant. Other agreements with provinces and territories recognize, again, this really important component and have committed to other measures. C-35 was drafted, again, to fully respect provincial and territorial jurisdiction. Regulation of hours of care is a matter of provincial and territorial jurisdiction.
Wisely, my colleague, Ms. Ferrari, was asking about spaces earlier. Which order of government is directly accountable for creating new childcare spaces, just so we're all clear?
Provinces and territories are responsible for the creation of childcare spaces.
Thank you. I have no more questions, Chair.
Merci, Madame Sack.
Thank you, Ms. Sachs. Ms. Bérubé? You have 2.5 minutes. In C-35, there's no definition of childcare. I'd like to know whether this would apply to para or school-linked programming or part-time childcare. What other types of childcare are covered?
Thank you. So childcare is defined in the legislation. There is language in there that is legal language that speaks to, Kelly, you might have to help me. It's where we use that tutor word. It's jurisprudence language. Mind jumping in?
Thanks. Sorry. Yeah. So in the legislation, it speaks to parents, caregivers, and tutors, which encompasses the sort of generally understood parents and guardians.
The bill does not specify the age of the children at issue for this new Canada-wide ELCC. Why not? Why aren't there age categories of the children who would be covered by the bill?
And it's an important one, I think, that again speaks to the longevity that is intended by this bill. As you may be aware, the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system right now is intended and focused on children from the ages of 0 to 6 across Canada. There are other commitments in this space with respect to before and after school care. What What the legislation does by not putting specificity around that is provide flexibility in the long term for the government to expand its focus to children over the age of 6, if necessary. So instead of locking us in long term, it really provides the flexibility for the Canada-wide system to grow over time.
Y a-t-il une raison?
Is there any reason why, so far, the federal government is focused on children who aren't yet of school age?
I think the simple answer to that question maybe is that we have to start somewhere. And so we're starting with children who we know are at a vulnerable age in terms of the incredible impact of investment in their care at this time. So we're starting from the beginning, but at the same time, I will say, working with provinces and territories to look for opportunities to expand investments in before and after school care, which may go beyond the age of 6. Provinces and territories, of course, having jurisdiction in this area, always have the flexibility to make those investments themselves. But the choice of the federal government was to really start at this young age where we know the benefits are so important for children in Canada.
Merci. Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Ms. Bérubé. Ms. Cirillo.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I'm going to go back to the decent work and working conditions. As it was previously mentioned, 95% of the workforce is women, and I'm always conscious of the discrimination that women face, especially immigrant women, every day in the workforce. So I just wanted to go back to 7.1D, but also just this idea of the workforce. And I just wanted to understand, or maybe you could share, Ms. Lattimore, if you could share some of the discussions that happened around the language of qualified and well-supported early childcare education workforce, why it wasn't stronger, maybe more explicitly mentioning fair wages and working conditions, because we know that marginalized groups need this protection. So I wanted to get an understanding of why the language is maybe a little less explicit than it could be. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate the question. And I think this is, it's really a reflection of the limitations that we have in federal jurisdiction, where we are looking on the one hand to reflect in 7.1D and that focus on quality, the vital importance of the ECE workforce in contributing to that quality care without stepping on provincial and territorial jurisdiction, which is what we would be doing if we attempted to be more prescriptive with respect to specific wages. Where we can get into a little bit more specificity is in the bilateral agreements. And so that's where we see with provinces and territories commitments to the development of things like wage grids, wage floors, and real investments that, as I mentioned earlier, we believe we will see improving over time. The focus really in the first few years of the bilateral agreements has been on access and affordability. What we will see created in terms of space for greater investments in the coming years, I think will be in the workforce. And certainly the work that we're doing now with the Federal, Provincial, Territorial Forum of Ministers most responsible for early learning and childcare, as well as with the National Advisory Council, is to really dig in on the challenges in the workforce space.
Yeah, and you mentioned that we're hoping that these things happen, and we really do need to keep an eye on it. So I'm going to want to know about reporting, but I just wanted to mention here something. Childcare Resource and Research Unit, a nonprofit that conducts research for childcare market in Canada, was saying that childcare workers are making between $16 and just under $19 an hour, and that the federal government did leave out of this agreement setting minimum wages. And this advocate group and advocates are saying that childcare wages have to hit $30 an hour to meet demand for the service and that the wages aren't coming up fast enough. So I guess if you could just let us know if it's being monitored, how's it being monitored? I know there's reporting, and they're talking about reporting. How can we ensure that exploitation does not continue in this sector as it grows?
Yeah, I think the numbers associated with wages are a concern to everyone who is working and building policy in this space. And so part of our role, both multilaterally and bilaterally, is to stay on top of those wages and to work openly with organizations like the CRRU and other advocates who are doing this important research.
Ms. Zerlo, Ms. Gray, for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. In the government's decision to put a focus on funding of public and not-for-profit childcare spaces, did this recommendation come from the department, or was this direction from the minister?
So Budget 2021, I believe, spoke to a focus on not-for-profit childcare, and that's been reflected in the bilateral agreements with provinces and territories.
So are you saying then that that direction came from the minister?
I have not personally been privy to where that direction would have come from.
So if, well, your department is the one working on this childcare legislation. So if that direction didn't come from your department, who's working on this legislation for childcare, who would it have come from then if it didn't come from the minister?
So the not-for-profit focus that is in the federal legislation aligns with the not-for-profit focus that is in the bilateral agreements. That's the reason that it's there right now. The intention with the legislation is to ensure consistency with the bilateral agreements.
Okay, so therefore, it didn't come from work that your department had done and recommended to the minister. It came from the other way, and then you worked on this legislation. So what research and considerations were provided by the minister to your department to make this the focus? And can you table that for this committee?
So again, I can't speak, having not been here at the time that decisions may have been made about this, around whether or not direction was provided. What I can tell you is that there certainly is a body of research that links not-for-profit care with the provision of high-quality care. But what the legislation and the bilateral agreements, or certainly the bilateral agreements, reflect is that for-profit and private care does play a role in the provision of high-quality childcare in Canada, and the bilateral agreements provide space for that.
So that research that you're referencing, can you table that for this committee then?
I would be happy to provide research that supports that.
I understand from your presentation slides that the goal of this department is to create 250,000 new childcare spaces within 3 years. Where did this 250,000 number come from?
So the goal of the provinces and territories together will be creating 250,000 spaces. Space creation itself is not something that the federal government can do. What we can do is provide.
Thank you. I understand that, but where did the number 250,000 come from? Where's the calculation for that? What's the metrics for that? Was that also a direction from the minister, or where did that number come from? Do you have analysis? Do you have a report that you can table? What's the breakdown for that?
So space creation in Canada, I think I mentioned earlier, some of the work that was done to support space creation numbers in the Canada-wide agreements comes from experience with the province of Quebec and the determination that there is a coverage rate with respect to early learning and childcare availability that ensures that families who have access to a licensed space can get access to that
Okay,
space.
that wasn't the question, though. That the question was, where did the 250,000 number come from? And it sounds like you don't know where the number came from, and yet it's right in your presentation that's the goal of the federal government to work with the provincial governments. I'll move on. What percentage of childcare spaces presently are run by private operators?
I don't have a number for the percentage of childcare spaces that are run by private operators. That would be a number that is collected potentially at the municipal or territorial level, or potentially by municipalities.
So what you're creating through this legislation is there'll be funding that will be going to government and not-for-profit type organizations, and yet you actually don't know. What you're saying is you don't know how many private operators there are. Is that correct? You don't know how many will be left out of this.
Private operators are not left out of the Canada-wide agreement. Private operators are recognized as being.
The question is, how many are there? What does this represent?
What private operator? I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
So how many
question.
private operators are there that are in the country?
I don't have a number in front of me that I can speak to right now with respect to the number of private operators in the country.
Okay, and so you've got in here that you're going to be primarily focusing on the not-for-profit and just recognizing and respecting. So right out of the gate, does that mean that private operators won't receive any funding? You're recognizing and respecting.
Private operators are already receiving funding under the Canada-wide agreements.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's great. You went over quite a bit. But anyhow, I did not want to interfere with your line of questioning, so we'll now move to Mr. Van Minen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate you coming forward, outlining the parameters of this program. You know, having just recently crossed over the age of 40, I thought maybe it's just a little too late for me to get any benefit out of this. But the reality is that the return on investment is, for every dollar invested, is $1.51 to $2.80 in terms of what's being returned to the economy. So my point here is that you don't need to have children to benefit from this program. It strengthens the economy overall. So I'm glad to see this go forward. I'm eager to see this go forward, and I'm eager to see this embedded in legislation. So I'm glad that this is before this committee. During the debate, some members criticized this bill for lacking detail on implementation. And our understanding is that the conditions and the targets are set in the bilateral agreements, which this legislation reinforces. Could you please confirm whether this is correct and explain how exactly the system is being operationalized?
Thank you for the question. The system is being operationalized by provinces and territories with the support of the federal government. One of the things that I think people tend to point to in the bilateral agreements is a requirement for bilateral implementation committees. These are committees that exist at the working level between public servants in the federal government, within our secretariat, and the provinces and territories that are mandated to meet at least twice a year to monitor ongoing progress of implementation of the agreements. Importantly, implementation committees also include regional and national stakeholders to ensure that those views, the actual experience of what implementation feels like on the ground, is reflected at those committees. What I will say, though, is that although we do spend a lot of time thinking about and tracking the work of implementation committees, what is really at the core of ongoing positive implementation are the relationships that this team builds with provincial and territorial colleagues in working with them on a day-to-day basis. And those relationships are built from engaging over, the little challenges that are faced day to day in planning for investments, in doing some of that course correction that I mentioned earlier, where, for example, a province like Saskatchewan may think that it's going to reach $10 a day much later in the agreement and actually be in a position to announce $10 a day yesterday. So that's how we monitor and manage implementation, is by maintaining those relationships along with some formality along the way that you see reflected in the agreements themselves.
You say on page 10 that there are penalties if you don't receive your information on time from the provinces or the territories. My question is what information are you requesting, and what are you going to do with it?
Thanks. It's a great question. So there are a few different pieces of information that we require from provinces and territories for each fiscal year. We require audited financial statements that are a reflection of where funding is spent, and so that for us is just a key function of ensuring the sound use of public funds and that federal funding is going where it is intended. Provinces and territories also provide to us annual reports which outline their accomplishments under those key principles that are reflected in the agreements. Some provinces and territories publish those annual reports, others don't. The federal government's intention, once we have all of those reports, is to put together a federal report that makes public to Canadian families the progress of the system. I will say that there have been challenges for many provinces and territories over the last number of years in putting together some of that annual reporting, but we're getting into a bit of a groove with them right now. And this is certainly a very busy time of year for us as a number of those reports are coming in.
Why does the bill not mention the early childhood education workforce?
So the early childhood education workforce does have mention in 7.1d of the legislation, where we speak to the importance of the workforce in contributing to high quality childcare in Canada. Where we do not go further on the workforce is reflected or is a reflection of our intention to keep this legislation as purely federally focused, so not to impose conditions on provinces, territories, or Indigenous partners, and to respect fully their jurisdiction in this space.
Thank you, Van Bynen. That concludes pretty well around. We've only got a few minutes left. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adjourn?
Yes, could we 6 minutes? We have one more round. And then we'll have another minute.
Would you like to
Okay, what's the wishes of the committee? Okay, we'll go at 2 minute round. Oh, okay, 2 minute round. Where do we start? 2. We'll, yeah, okay, 2 twos. We'll go to Madame Beyroube.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have 2 minutes. Yes, thank you. You state that with this bill, which works mostly from the federal level, doesn't and needn't include an opt-out option for Quebec. So the current agreement links Quebec for 5 years. What guarantees for Quebec that at the next round of obligations, the standards and obligations of a new sort will not be imposed by the federal government? That's a good question. And this is why the bill is important in ensuring that the federal government is involved as a partner beyond 5 years. If this bill is carried and becomes law, it will confirm that the federal government has a financial commitment to ensure the ongoing growth of early learning and child care, respecting flexible agreements with the provinces, including the asymmetric agreement with Quebec. What in the bill will make it possible To avoid conflicts between Quebec and Ottawa, that's what's of interest to me at the end of this 5-year period. What here ensures that there will not be a conflict?
Is ensure for the province of Quebec that Canada will be there in the long run with funding to continue improvement to the Quebec system of early learning and childcare. It has been and continues to be the intention of the federal government to work with Quebec to sign asymmetric agreements recognizing Quebec's deep work in this space and its success in building a childcare system.
Madame Bérubé, Madame Zerello for 2 minutes or less.
Mr. Chair, and I just wanted to ask about children with disabilities and families with kids with disabilities. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was ratified by Canada in 1991, talks about that children with disabilities should enjoy a full and decent life in conditions which ensure dignity, promote self-reliance, and facilitates the child's active participation in the community. And I can say in British Columbia, this is still a work in progress and still a challenge. I hear from many, many families that can't get access to adequate daycare. So I just wanted to ask the team here, what was heard from families with disabilities, with children with disabilities, and what were the considerations in the bill that reflected specific input from families with children with disabilities?
Thank you for the question. So one of the things that maybe I can speak to with respect to children with disabilities is the value that we are now seeing in having built a national advisory council that is really reflective of the diversity of Canada and having voices of individuals on that council who have deep experience and appreciation for the challenges that are faced by families with disabilities. Bill C-35 acknowledges that the government is committed to continuing work in this space. This is rights-based legislation. It's reflected in the preamble of the bill as well. Its purpose is to further the progressive realization of the right to benefit from childcare services as recognized in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that includes application to persons with disabilities. Childcare services, we understand from the perspective of many vulnerable communities, are difficult to access. Facilities are more expensive to build. And so our goal is to work very closely with provinces and territories through the bilateral agreements to ensure that inclusive spaces are at the top of the list in terms of those investments as space creation continues.
Thank you. Madame Zerello, we're going to go to Ms. Gray for 2 minutes and then to Madame Ferrari, and then to the governing side members for 2 minutes. So whoever, Madame Ferrari for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. I want to state that I really want on the record that this is about the welfare of the child, that there's nobody in here that doesn't want access to quality, affordable childcare. There's nobody that we've met with, that we've talked to, that this is what we want. And the stress and the pages and pages and pages of notes I have from parents whose mental health is declining daily because they do not have access to childcare is a major, major concern. And so when I'm doing these lines of questioning about inclusivity and the language, it is for the welfare of the child. It is not to be some political game. It really is about the intersection of having access to all. In page 19, you said slide 19, the council would consist of 10 to 18 who represent diversity of Canadian society. What are the KPIs, key performance indicators for council members? How are you measuring the success, and how did you decide who these 10 to 18 are that are representing diversity, and does that include small, independent, operated, owned home daycares?
Thank you for the question. I'm sure you can appreciate that having as a goal the creation of a national advisory council that is reflective of the diversity of Canada, but also limiting the size of that council to 18 people makes it almost impossible for every voice, every experience to be heard on that council.
Because we're so limited, I hate to interrupt, I'm so sorry, but is there private represented on that council? And what are the key performance indicators to measure success for this council?
I don't have key performance indicators to measure success of the council. The council is an advisory body in place to provide advice to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
How are we going to measure if it is successful?
I think success of the council this year will reflect the council's work to engage with members of ELCC communities across Canada, to engage even with the for-profit sector, to ensure that the advice that it is providing to the minister on the workforce challenges, which I mentioned, they've been tasked with that as their primary priority right now, is reflective of the diverse experience and views of Canadians across the country.
Thank you, Madame Ferrari. Meeting adjourned.